Hi, thanks for watching. Going to talk about India, New Zealand, which kicks off quite soon, the very first couple of days of February. Yeah, we'll do that first. I'll talk about the Ashes a little bit at the end. Okay, so India, New Zealand. This is a surprisingly interesting series, I think. I think that if you asked me about this series a year ago, I would have been pretty dismissive of my interest in it. But let's change a little bit. New Zealand, I've talked about a little bit. I guess we'll start with them. Um, One in Sri Lanka, which was a really big upset. The more I think about it, a really big upset with no slow bowling at all to win in Sri Lanka, a team that's taken a lot of knocks in terms of its batting quality over the years. Was a great effort, and pace to the West Indies. Now, West Indies are a story for another time, and again, one of the big, if you like, droppers in stock. Um, but nevertheless, a massive victory. I mean, at no point were the West Indies really in the series, even with the draw on the first test. And the last year has been very positive for New Zealand's fast bowling stocks, and where that dynamic interacts with India's young batting card is one of the more intriguing battles of the next year or so, I would suggest. Um, we'll start out, however, we're talking about New Zealand's batting, which is again always critical. We know the fast bowling is going to be pretty good. Southey, Bolt, Wagner, Bracewell, some depth there as well. But it's really the batting that needs to show up for New Zealand to be competitive on a match-by-match basis. You should know that Ross Taylor had an absolutely extraordinary series against the West Indies. Scored 495 runs in 3 tests with 3 centuries. Pretty impressive. Only was dismissed twice in that series. It actually rocketed his average up now to 47.51 for a career average. I don't think many people would know that. 33% scoring, very good. An 8.7 century rate, also very good. Those numbers would be pride of place in pretty much every batsman. It's not Hashim Amla or Sachin Tendulkar or Brian Lara kind of quality, Rahul Dravid kind of quality. That's really good numbers in tough batting conditions that he plays in, as one of the lone batting threats. So Ross Taylor tends to be overlooked and tends to be downplayed and underestimated. He's a fine player and a good record against India. I mentioned this in my preview when New Zealand were in India 2012 now. Um, Against India, he's averaging 43.92, very solid, 28.6 score percentage, and very importantly, 4.7 century rate. So on the numbers, he's quite likely to make a century in this series. He has a century in both of the previous 2 Test series against India. So again, a threat with the bat who's proven himself against Indian attacks, which obviously will be less potent than they were in India when Taylor did reasonably well. Another guy, again, I talk about, this is the same guys I talk about all the time in New Zealand, but they are important, Kane Williamson. I also talk about him because he's starting to get it, as it were. Very young player thrown in, early in his career. Batting average has gone up for 3 straight years, 27.6 in his first year, 32.88. And this last year that's just finished, 41.5. He scored in 42% of his innings last year, 8 scores in 19 innings. And this is a little nugget of a stat. In his last 14 innings, he's passed 40 in 10 of them. So Kane Williamson's getting starts, and that's the first step in the battle, if you like, of becoming a really solid Test batsman, is can you survive and can you get going? It's a little bit concerning because people think of Williamson, and I do, as a really superior player of slow bowling, relatively speaking, and that's a bit odd that his innings are getting curtailed in that area. Excuse me, but nonetheless, there's no way you can play that as anything else but very good for a player as young as he is. That he's passed 40 in 10 of his past 14 innings. So it's the kind of thing that makes you feel that it's just simmering under the surface and the eruption's going to come. Let's talk about the Indians, though. Usually they're the more high-profile team. Came off a really big series against South Africa, obviously. Really interesting series again, and one that Indian fans should be very pleased with. I know they lost the series 1-0. But the draw was obviously a superb Test match and one they probably should have won on the balance of the 5 days. And very much were in it in the second Test. I mean, really, they had a matter of if they could score 250 runs, they would have saved the Test and gone away 0-0, which would have very much not embarrassed South Africa, but been a big shock. And most importantly, yes, you can have a look at the bowling and you can have some concerns with the bowling. But the young batsmen proved themselves on the first Test. I mean, there's a long way to go for these guys, Kohli and Pujara and Rahane. But the very first hurdle, the first 2 Tests that we really looked at them closely, they passed with flying colours. Pujara now, we're starting to get the point beyond, wow, Pujara's had a nice start to his career. And we're starting to get the point where Pujara is looking like an all-time great. Pujara now ranks second all-time batting average. All-time. Since 1877. For players with a minimum of 20 innings. He's actually had 28. Substantial amount of innings. More than just a start now. He's averaging 66.25. That's 6 runs higher than guys like Graham Pollock and George Headley and Sutcliffe. He scored a century against every team he's faced already. Now, this is a pretty crazy stat. It's not as big a deal as it used to be, making a century against every opponent. And I consider really there's 7 opponents for every major test nation at this stage. He scored a century against 5 of them already. And that was used to be a big deal, scoring a century against every test team. 5 out of 7. Only teams he hasn't are the 2 other Asian teams, Sri Lanka and Pakistan. Looks really good. Now again, he's played a lot of those test matches at home, but as we saw in South Africa with even the 25 in the first innings was an important 25 and a score and a century, looking real good. And while the New Zealand pace attack is good, you'd have to pick Pujara to come out on top in that one. Kohli 52.2, 39% score percentage, 5.6 century rate since the 1st of January last year. Again, numbers that would stack up very well with anyone in the world. Even Michael Clark, those numbers are pretty good. Had a perfect series against the Kiwis when they played in India, scored in every single innings he played. So we're starting to get the point. People again with Kohli, and I mentioned this in other previews, tend to sort of think of him as a bit of a disappointment at test level because his one-day stuff is just so crazy. But we're beyond that as well. We're beyond these sort of infant stages of these guys' careers. We're now into the second phase of them really being super rising stars. And both of them were superb against a much better attack than they're going to face here. As solid as New Zealand are in that department in South Africa, and there's every reason to think that they're going to at least have their moments. They may well be. I'll come to that in a few minutes. Ajinkya Rahane, third option guy that's sort of been forgotten about, these 2 big bright stars, but Rahane, 60 first class average, over 60 first class average, someone again you should be expecting big things from. Bolstered his average to 43.4, average 69.66 in South Africa, as good as either of the above 2. Again, showed a lot of fight, actually showed a lot of grit down the card as you sometimes need to halt collapses. There was a number of times where India looked like they might have been falling apart under Dale Steyn examinations, and Rahane did really, really well against the best bowler in the world. So another guy, not quite as exciting as the other 2, but certainly someone to watch. On the bowling side of things, just briefly, look, it's always an issue for India, and it still is, and that also looked the part against South Africa. They nearly conceded a world record chase. But Mohammad Shami had his moments. He's taking 4 wickets a match at 26.63 so far in his Test career, which surprised me. He already has 2 10-wicket matches in his first-class career, in 22 matches. He's quite a young player. In 22 first-class matches, already has 2 10-wicket matches, which is quite rare for an Indian pace bowler, and quite encouraging. In Test so far, sorry, those numbers were first class, 4 wickets a match at 26.63, but in Test very similar, 4.3 wickets a match at 26.17. That's in 8 Test matches. One that really stood out to me is that 13 of his 17 wickets are unassisted, which is also very encouraging. Very physical bowler, hits the deck hard, comes at batsman, quite a lot of attitude in his bowling. Now, this is all the same kinds of things we said about Umesh Yadav, and his career has sort of gone off the track a little bit due to injuries. So again, we have a right to be sceptical of Indian pace bowlers considering the history there, but nevertheless, good numbers, encouraging. Certainly we'll get some help, although maybe less so than a swing bowler might, but certainly we'll get some help from these New Zealand pitchers. So where does that leave us in this series? It's a 3-test series. I actually haven't thought too much about the results, despite all the chatter. I mentioned before that India will have their moments. At the very least, their batsmen will have their moments. They'll win a test. I mean, there's going to be points where the sheer weight of runs is going to just come down on New Zealand too hard. Rain's always hovering in the background. Suggests this is probably going to be 2 results in this series. 2 tests, they're going to have results. Look, it's a touch-and-go situation. I'm sort of teetering between India 2-0 and New Zealand 1-1. I'm going to give New Zealand one of the tests. I mean, while I'm saying that this batting card is super awesome and great, openers are still a little bit suspect. I'm still not sold on VJ. Darwin had a middling series at best in South Africa. They can crack through those openers and get to Pujara and Kohli relatively early. They are due for failure at some point. It's not unreasonable to suggest New Zealand can crack them open once. In the way they're batting as well as they have in several years. So let's go 1-1. Let's be brave. New Zealand 1-1. I'm going to talk about Australia certainly in the next video when I talk about them taking on the South Africans. That'll be in about a week and a half's time, and I may also be posting something on the blog as well. So once again, thank you very much for watching, guys.